city maestro.
All right.
Okay, 7 o'clock, I'm going to call the Select Board meeting of Tuesday, February 11th to order. And the first item is approval of the agenda.
Moved.
Moved by Farhad, seconded by Victor. Are there any requested amendments to the agenda? We have a need for a executive session, correct? Okay. So all in favor of approving the drafted agenda, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Next is approval of our minutes of our January 28th Select Board meeting.
Moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any amendments to the minutes?
I had a small one.
Please.
Lines 96 and 97, where I'm saying that the cost we would pay back the cost in gas savings. It should be the cost difference.
Cost differential? Okay.
Yep.
Any other amendments? Okay, hearing none, all in favor of approving the draft minutes with one amendment, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, next is citizen comments. Is there anyone that's here for something that is not on the agenda? Please.
You should take 1 minute, keep you literally on your agenda. I'm Randy Krakowski. You probably recognize we've written to you several times and came to the December meeting about the issue of homelessness and encouraging a task force be formed. We wanted to come back and personally thank, since we had personally prodded, the progress that's being made on it. It's an incredibly good experience for those of us who are serving on it. We've created a subcommittee, and we have a nearly unanimous recommendation for, our first recommendation for a porta potty on the town green, which will be coming to you very soon. But not to preempt communications, I just wanted to come and say, it's one thing for citizens to prod, it's another thing for us to come back and say, thank you for responding, and that's what we wanted to do, so, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for being a part of it.
You're welcome. If there's nothing else, then Michael from Vermont Brew. So you have a request for public assemblage permit?
Yes, I do.
Allow
How you all doing
alcohol
this
sales?
evening?
Good.
Excellent.
So I don't know if we know about the Vermont Brew, if you want to just give us a quick
Sure.
one over, what you got going on?
Sure. So we've started this endeavor about a year and a half ago. Myself and my business partner, Claude Flynn, who's our head coach. We approached Rick Marshall and Mike McAuliffe over at the Memorial Sports Center for use of the space to use for our endeavor. We are a professional arena football team that's coming here March 29th, almost a little over a month from now. Our aim as an organization is threefold. We are meant to promote our players up into the above ranks, so think of us as a minor league professional arena team. So we bring gentlemen in from out of state and locally to that are hoping to be professional athletes. We're training them to be professional athletes at the higher level as well. So that's our first goal. Our second goal is to provide exciting arena football to the Addison County and the town of Middlebury as well. Something this town knows pretty well is football. And from my background, I've seen it firsthand as a former football coach in the state. Having to have to come down here, it's been amazingly fun to be a part of. Not as a visitor, but unfortunately, but it's great to see. So the final thing is to be a positive community member in Addison County and the town of Middlebury as well. So that is as an organization, that's who we are. We've been planning and preparing for this now since August of 2018. And one of the stipulations we were asking as part of the public assemblage permit is to allow alcohol in the Memorial Sports Center as part of our games only. We are a professional organization, and we treat ourselves and hold ourselves to that title of professional in every sense of the word. So one of the things that the Memorial Sports Center said was, because it is on town property and especially on school property, the endeavors, there are certain benchmarks that we had to hit in order to get to this point. And I'm happy to say that we've met those. We've spoken with the school board. We have spoken with the superintendent and the head of the school board specifically before I went to the school board to ask permission for it. With some of the parameters that you see in our in our permit right now as well, those were recommendations from the school board and from the superintendent as well as the police chief when I met with him. As far as trying to maintain a safe environment for all while still enjoying the game that I know will be exciting and fun for all to watch. The arena football game is different than an outdoor football game in that it is only 8-on-8. It is built for a hockey rink, so it is a 50-yard field, and it is 85 feet wide. The traditional parameters of a hockey rink, it is pretty much all offense you can think of. It's a lot of passing. There is some running, but there is a little bit of passing. Games will range in scores from 50 to 60, so definitely much different than the outdoor game itself. There is absolutely no punting of the football. You either you have 4 downs to make a first down, and it's still 10 yards. You either go for it on fourth down, or you kick a field goal in a rather narrow field goal post. But that is the game itself. There are some other rules as well that are slightly different, but it's built for an indoor facility. That's the game itself. And one of the things that we'd like to offer to our fans is the ability to have alcohol during the game. So that is, we've taken every stipulation we can to make sure that everything is in there before we came to you guys, but we are asking for your permission as well to be able to do that.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
No, sounds like they've followed the protocol, so, I mean,
So just one quick one. Usually
Sure.
we have a summary of like a public safety visit. Does that have to happen for this or not?
If you would like it, I'm happy to.
No, I'm more asking
Oh.
Ann than,
Well, I was gonna ask before you finish, if each event will be permitted as a special, special event, or how does that go through?
Were you planning to have a catering license for each event, Michael?
I was going to go to the individual people that we were asking to serve the beer and ask them to provide their license, provide their.
So they would be
Okay.
submitting a special event or catering,
so that's separate than,
so if each event has the permit.
okay. So this is just for the assemblage, and then the person who's actually serving the alcohol comes back for another special license that includes the safety review that we typically see, right?
And DLC would be the ones approving that.
Okay. Okay.
So we would hold, if I'm rewording this for clarification, we would hold the assemblage permit, and then whoever I contact to line up for the 5 games, we would also welcome them back in to do a special event.
They would need to submit either a special event application or their catering request
Okay.
to the town clerk's office prior to the event. And
And how much time would you like?
I think it needs to be to Department of Liquor Control at least 5 days ahead, so,
Okay.
but it needs to come here first, so I would say at least 10 days.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a good question. I was wondering about how this differs from our normal.
Yes.
Okay. I think we're helping Michael understand the process too, so.
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm brand new to the assemblage and making sure, I just want to make sure that everything's aligned so that, it is comfortable for everybody in the town. I know it's kind of new because the Memorial Sports Center is sitting on school property, and being an educator myself, I value and honor and respect school property quite a bit. So I want to make sure that everything is in order before we run through this.
Okay. Other questions from the board?
Well, I think that's clear. I was just wanting to be sure that it didn't open it up for more sales by, say, other groups that would now be used. Like, does it set a precedent? Or they would have to just come before us, right?
These are very specific approvals.
Just for this?
Yes.
Mhm. Okay. That's what I understand, I just wanted to be sure. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pleasure of the board.
Move to authorize Town Manager Kathleen Ramsey to sign the Vermont Pro Football Incorporated Public Assemblage Permit with the provisions that were discussed, with the town clerk.
Second.
And what he's meaning is that this is your assemblage permit, but it doesn't give you the full approval to serve the alcohol without coming forward with someone with their liquor license, applying through at least 5 days before, so that the Vermont Liquor Control can approve that. Okay?
Great.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
Good luck.
Thank you
Hope
all
it-
very much. I
Hope
appreciate
it
it.
gets some attendance.
Thank you. I hope so too. Thank you so much.
So Ann, you've got the actual liquor licenses for approval.
Now I sort of understand the difference a little.
Well, I was
Still
kind of
learning.
wondering initially.
Still
So-
learning how this all works sometimes.
So it's time for liquor license renewals, but first, I think it would be good, you have in your packet, I believe, a request for a new license, and that's from
For Mid on
Middlebury
the
Inn on
Green.
the Green.
Yep.
Ms. Chelsea or Christopher? Come on in. So I thought I would give them the opportunity to just introduce themselves to you and let them tell you a little bit about what their plans are.
We got one. Ann?
We're really not as bad as they say we are. See?
Good evening. So my name is Chelsea Griggs, and this is my husband Christopher, and we're the new owners of the Inn on the Green here in Middlebury. During the past year of ownership, we have focused our attention on increasing the occupancy of the inn, and our main goal of that is to help provide steady employment to all of our staff. Just because it is one of those businesses that go up and down with hospitality. In addition, we're trying to improve our current services that we're offering to our guests so that we're more appealing and people want to stay with us and visit with us. So obtaining our liquor license would allow us to offer an additional option to our guests that is going to enhance their overall stay and hopefully promote local products to them while they're with us. Our intentions are to only provide local brews and wines that are right here and produced in the Middlebury area. It would only be provided to the guests of the inn, no members of the public. We're not looking to open any additional facilities at the inn. It would just be really to the guests that are staying with us so that we know that they're in a safe environment. We did have an inspection today by both the chief of fire and sheriff who visited the property and have granted us approval on our safety measures at the property. We've also been working with the state of Vermont for quite a few months on what this would entail so that we are best prepared and have undergone the training along with myself and our staff so that if this were granted, we would be able to pursue this after May is our intention.
Okay, questions of Chelsea?
No?
Pleasure of the board.
Well,
Are you going?
no, you go.
Okay. I'll move to approve the new first-class liquor license application for Inn on the Green as presented.
And I'll second it.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Well, Chelsea and Christopher, welcome.
Yeah, thank
Thank
you.
you
Yeah.
very
Thank you.
much.
Good luck. Thank you.
Glad you're here.
All right, so further in your packet, you should have the list of those entities that submitted their applications in time to be at this meeting. And so that's like 25 of them. I've given you on that list if they're applying for first class, third class, second class, outside consumption or entertainment. So it's all kind of listed there. Normally, we're asking you to approve pending inspection, but hot off the press, Tom Hanley just handed me the inspection forms, and so for all of the ones that he has here, They have all been approved by the chief of police and fire, and he's only holding on to one which is not included on this list right now. So that'll come up at the next meeting. So I would suggest that it would be good if you would approve for these liquor licenses to be approved and for me to sign for them so that you don't all have to sign each one.
Any questions of Ann?
I'll move to approve all renewal applications for first, second, third-class liquor licenses, outside consumption and entertainment permits as presented, and authorize town clerk Ann Webster to sign the applications on behalf of the select board.
Moved and seconded. Nice motion. Take the load over to Ann.
Okay.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay, thanks, Ann.
Thank you. All right.
How many more do you have coming our way?
There might be almost as many again. It's
Really?
like that there are a few who
Okay.
won't be applying, so I'm not quite sure. But
Okay.
at your next meeting, I think is on the Wednesday after you.
Yes.
you're the 26th.
We moved it to the Wednesday.
Yeah, so I'll probably be on the agenda again for that Wednesday, hopefully with all the rest of them.
Okay.
Great.
Chief Hanley. So Chief's here with some Public Health and Safety Committee recommendations and revisions on updates for ordinances.
Yeah, this is fairly simple and straightforward. Two of the ordinances have been criminal ordinances, which require the state's attorney to prosecute, and he's got to have a letter filed with us to be able to prosecute those ordinances. He has elected not to prosecute these ordinances, which means we have an ordinance with zero enforcement. Suggested that we go back and make these civil. The reason they were criminal in the first place was a bit historical. As the law was initially written, unless you were stopped for a motor vehicle violation, you didn't have to provide any identification. So the experience of Burlington and early on us, we'd stop college students who already knew that they didn't have to identify themselves for minor violations, noise, possession of an open container, and we'd had these John Doe tickets that went nowhere. So it wasn't enforceable. So we decided to keep that as criminal ordinances so that we could get the identification and get them where they had to be, in front of a judge or in front of a prosecutor. It's no longer the case. The statute has been changed. They're mandated to provide identification. So we've changed or elect to change the two ordinances, the noise ordinance and the open container ordinance, to civil, so that we would just simply write a ticket and no longer be sending them into criminal court. The other two ordinances are, again, we did some updates to the bicycle ordinance after the latest revisions a few years ago were put in place. We realized we had to make some adjustments to that. Fairly minor. We passed them around to the bicycle group here in town. I think, Laura, you've seen them. So the Public Safety Committee looked at them and endorsed all of our changes. Public Safety Committee endorsed them as well, and so we put those changes in the ordinance. The last one is one that was initially brought up by Fred Dunnington. In the event we ever had anybody that was going to do those scooters that you leave around town, Lyft and, I don't know, the Bird and some of the others.
Yeah.
There was some expressed interest to do that here in town, so we just thought we'd get ahead of the game and just have an ordinance to regulate that in the event they did come. So it doesn't really change anything else in the ordinance, it just adds something in case they come. If they're not here, it's sitting there on as a piece of paper. So those are the ordinances we have.
Questions of Chief?
Chief, can you just explain the difference between the waiver penalty, like there's a penalty and then a waiver penalty? I just don't understand the difference.
The $800 and the $200?
Yeah,
Statute provides a maximum for a civil violation of $800. That's the maximum. The fine can't be higher than that.
okay,
The waiver penalty is, if you elect not to contest the charge, you can just mail in the fine.
okay.
So
You
we
you can, if you don't contest, you
waive-
send in
you-
the waiver fee.
send in the waiver fee.
Okay.
Just like
You
a
don't have
traffic
to-
ticket, you can,
Okay,
I don't contest this. Doesn't mean you're guilty, it just means you're not contesting it, and you mail in the fine.
okay. Thank
If
you,
it goes before the hearing officer, they can set any fine they want between 0 and 800.
thank you. Haven't had a lot of personal experience, so I didn't know how it worked.
Well, that's good to know.
Oh, my God. So,
Go learn sometime, right?
just to be clear, this is nothing that we can adopt tonight. We will have to warn it. Kathleen has looked at our calendar, and she's recommending if we are in favor of this, that we would warn it for March 24th. Gives us time to get the notification out and have our hearing.
Is something like an ATV considered a motor vehicle?
Yes,
Okay, so that's covered under the motor vehicle designation.
yes.
Okay, just checking.
It is getting a little more ambiguous, so it's good that you asked that question. And
Well,
we did too.
Some of the changes in the ordinance reflected the various devices that are out there now that people are riding.
Right.
Before it was a bicycle, which was defined as two wheels with pedals. And now there's all kinds of stuff out there.
Right.
These things that look like a skateboard with one wheel, and there's all kinds of wacky stuff that people are riding. Our ordinance and the state statute doesn't cover those things. They can't keep up with the changes, so we decided to make ours kind of broad so it covers anything.
Right, and that's why the ordinance is bikes and other rideable devices.
Right.
To try to capture that. Mhm. So I'll move that we warn a public hearing on the proposed amendments to the ordinance, do you want me to say them all? To all those ordinances we just covered for the Select Board's meeting on Tuesday, March 24th, 2020.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Are there any other questions, comments? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Okay. Thanks, Chief. Howard, you're next. Okay, this is Middlebury Energy Committee with an update on the Energy Committee's work on renewable energy policy, CO2 reduction strategy.
Well, thank you for giving us an opportunity to present this to you today. What we have is really a culmination of a couple of years' worth of work we've been doing in the Energy Committee, and it was really just taking everything we've been doing and putting it together into a comprehensive strategy. So we have a very energetic committee, which no pun intended, but it's a lot of good work has been coming out of it. So really what this is trying to move the town toward adopting a strategy to help reduce greenhouse gases, right? We all know sort of desperate times when it comes to climate. And so we feel it's important for the town to be a role model, you know, in an effort to reduce the greenhouse gases. So if you go to the next slide, oh, sorry. So yeah, that's our objective. And then really, you'll see later on, we have a specific target and when we'd like to achieve that. But we'll say that for later. So in terms of the scope, even though it's greenhouse gases in general, at this point, it's really focused on carbon, since that's a much more doable effort to be able to achieve at this point in time. You know, methane is a greenhouse gas, but that's much more complicated when it comes to trying to reduce that. So we're really focused on carbon at this point in time. And also, it's really focused on just municipal. You know, we'd like to extend it to the town. We've done some outreach to try and have residents adopt more, better practices with energy efficiency. And maybe at some point we'll be able to extend it to that. But at this point, this strategy is really focused on just the municipal part of this. And it's also, the last bullet is, it's really not to serve as a directive to the department heads, but really to present an opportunity to help reduce the carbon footprint. As we had seen in the last select board with Chief Hanley, you all approved the hybrid. That in itself was a 41% reduction in fuel consumption for that one vehicle. So, I think everyone here is on board, which is great. So if you go to the next. So here is a breakdown of different ways we consume energy as a town, or I should say municipal, as a municipality. So really, heating, drinking water, vehicles, and street lighting, right? Those are all consumers of energy. So the different fuel types you'll see there, you have oil, propane, electricity, natural gas. Those are all those are all, at this point in time, they all have a carbon footprint. So if you go to the next slide. So at this point, what we're setting as a target is an 80% reduction in 8 years. And before we get too caught up in that target, maybe we should get to the end of this presentation. So you can see it's actually more doable than you might think, especially with electricity. And Richard, who's done a ton of work, will present some of this in terms of the baseline that we have in place, right? So I'll save that part for Richard. But this goal is to help, as we all know, the state has some goals out there for reducing the carbon footprint. Renewable energy, I think they have 90% renewable by 2050. This is a step to help us get to work towards that goal. And we believe the municipal government, and in particular Middlebury, can really lead by example. That's important, and maybe even serve as a role model for other municipalities. So let's see, I don't know if this is where you want to take off here. Yeah. So let me just say, Richard, one of our newer members in the committee, spent a lot of time establishing an energy baseline, an energy consumption baseline for the town. So we looked at lots of records, did a lot of research, and came up with the different ways energy's been consumed. So I'll let him speak to the next few slides too.
Good evening. Hi. I'm 72 years old, and in 8 years from now, I will be 80 years old. And I think there's a good chance I'll live to be 80. And I'm not certain of it, but I think there's a good chance. And I would like to live to see us achieve the 80% reduction in carbon dioxide from town operations in my lifetime, which is relatively short compared to some people. Can we see? There we are. Okay, so I want to start with a very high-level statement about strategy. This strategy would be equally true for the state of Vermont or for the country of Australia or any entity that wants to do this. But here we're just talking about the operations of the town of Middlebury government. The mantra is electrify everything and decarbonize the electricity. Okay, that's the high-level strategy. The third step is to implement conservation and efficiency measures in support of the conversion of all of our energy use to electricity. So the less energy use we have to convert to electricity, the more straightforward it will be. So that's really where the role of energy conservation and energy efficiency comes in. Decarbonizing the electricity is happening in the state of Vermont as a result of the renewable portfolio standard that our utility companies are subject to. And Green Mountain Power, which supplies our electricity here, is doing a really good job of decarbonizing their electricity without our having to do anything special here as a town. For New England as a whole, about the electricity consumption for New England as a whole produces 1,000 pounds of CO2 for every megawatt hour of electricity. A few years ago, Green Mountain Power was producing 400 versus 1,000, and now they're down a little over 200. And they're on a trajectory to get them to zero. So in the planning that I'm outlining for you here, I've been assuming that by 8 years from now, Green Mountain Power will be at zero, and the electricity that is served up to us here will have zero carbon content. So that's one of our assumptions.
And just to let you know, GMP does have a goal of zero carbon by 2025, so that's what they're shooting for.
Yep, and if they miss by a few years, it'll be 2028. Okay, so,
Right.
which is what we're talking about here. I worked from the bills that the town treasurer pays. Yeah, that everything I'm gonna show you here is based on going through, and she's very good about assembling all the bills and spreadsheets and ways that make it accessible. I've also used multipliers that are available from the literature about how many pounds of CO2 do we produce for every gallon of gasoline, for every gallon of diesel fuel, for every gallon of propane, for every gallon of fuel oil, for every 100 cubic feet of natural gas, and so on. So, and I'm not showing you, I'm not burdening you with calculations, but if you want to see them, I would be happy to share them with you individually or as a group. So what I'm going to be showing here is estimates of how much CO2 we produce from each of these fuels. And by almost half of the CO2 we produce is still from electricity, because we're still at over 200 pounds of CO2 per megawatt hour. Gasoline and diesel fuel are very high. That's the top right and right hand pie pieces, and then fuel oil, natural gas, propane are each smaller, but none of them is trivial. If I can, I want to show you the next slide, if I may. And my point in this slide is not to go through it in detail, although again, I'd be happy to do it at the end of the presentation if you want to see the detail. There's this has been modified. I had misunderstood the org structure, the organizational structure of the town, about which piece is part of which other piece, and so I had organized this table a little incorrectly, and I think I've got it closer to right now. The thing that I want to show here is that we have vehicle use in most departments, and we have heating use in all departments, and we have different fuels in different departments. For different buildings use different fuels. And so it's a sort of, this matrix is fairly complicated. The summary in the across the bottom, if we can see it, is that 17% of the CO2 we produce is from gasoline, 17% from diesel fuel, 16% from propane, 43% from electricity, and 6% from natural gas. A couple of years ago, that would have been 0 from natural gas, of course, but we now have a couple of buildings that are heated with natural gas. So if we could just go on to the next one. We're going to assume that the Green Mountain Power achieves its goal of zero carbon electricity by 2025. We're going to assume all electric vehicles become more and more practical. They become less expensive, have a greater range. We're going to assume that more models of vehicles will become available as electric vehicles. You know, we started with cars, and we got pickups, and gradually specialty vehicles are being added. But you can't, at this moment, go out in the market and buy an electric dump truck. Okay, that's simply not available on the market. 8 years from now, that may be very different. Cold climate heat pumps are already very good at low temperatures. We've learned that the kind of cold climate heat pumps that are being recommended by the town's consultant for the Ilsley Library are effective down to minus 24 Fahrenheit. That's a big improvement over where we were a few years ago. And the consulting engineer actually said he didn't think we really needed a backup system, given that the cold climate heat pumps will function down to minus 24. We haven't, and we're going to assume that the incentives from Efficiency Vermont remain in place, or that they improve. So for the town to reach 80% CO2 reduction by 2028, there's several steps that we can do. We can replace fossil fuel heating systems with electric heat pumps as existing systems wear out and need to be replaced. And we're starting with the Old City Library, which is well underway already. We can replace fossil fuel vehicles and other mobile equipment with plug-in hybrids or all-electric vehicles as suitable vehicles become available. You know, we're already starting to see police cruisers that are plug-in hybrids, and we will see more specialty vehicles as time goes by. We can increase the energy efficiency of all of our buildings, and we can invest in more efficient equipment or processes for our water and wastewater treatment systems as replacement becomes necessary. The wastewater treatment plant is the biggest single user of electricity in the town's electricity budget. The timing, the technology exists now to replace all our heating systems with cold climate electric heat pumps. If you decided you wanted to invest the money, we could have all of our buildings on electric heat pumps by this time next year, if you wanted to. Okay, if it made sense in terms of the replacement schedule and so on. That's not true with vehicles. You know, you can't buy an all-electric snowplow or dump truck or backhoe, that's, so the early savings can be in building heating, and the late savings can be from vehicles. The good news is that, this is one possible scenario, if we replace all our fossil fuel use for buildings with electricity, and if the carbon intensity of electricity goes to zero by 2028, then we can achieve an 80% overall reduction with a 42% reduction in our vehicle carbon dioxide production. Okay, so that's sort of consistent with the idea that you do the buildings first and you deal with the vehicles later. So I think I'm going to turn this back over to Howard.
So as I said before, we've done a fair amount of work as a committee in terms of proposing projects and funding them, since we are fortunate enough to have a budget, thanks to the people of Middlebury. So work that we've already done, we had an energy audit of the police station and the teen center, which led to two projects that we undertook. One, oh, I'm sorry, if you go to the next slide. So with the teen center, installing a smart thermostat is saving $420 a year. You know, a simple little thing like that, which came out of the audit. Police station, there's the floor, the water roof air sealing, which that in itself is based on the audit we had, would save $446 a year. All good stuff. And then the library, which, you know, was sort of outside our committee, that was happening on its own. They did come to the committee, and we were supportive of going with the heat pump only solution, which is actually the cheaper solution anyway, which, as we see, will contribute greatly to the reduction of carbon. So if we go to the next slide. So, you know, what are we really asking from the select board? One is a commitment, and maybe it's more, at least support for a concerted effort to try and reduce the carbon footprint of the municipal energy. So we'd like to, and I had sent a proposed process to Heather as the chair of the infrastructure committee. I assume you're still the chair, to propose setting up an advisory board, whatever you would call it, that would include membership from the Energy Committee to look into greener solutions, alternatives for the various purchases. We have a schedule out there, so we know when things are being purchased. We can put the work into it to at least see, is there a viable alternative? As Richard said, there might not be at this point in time, but, you know, maybe by 2025, 2026, there's some reasonable alternatives. You know, obviously, the police cruiser with a hybrid, even though it's still consuming gasoline, it's greatly, you know, it's a 41% reduction. So those are all steps that would be helpful. And then also, one thing we've been working on, and Montpelier's been doing this, is a revolving loan fund, which is really funding projects. The savings that we realize from those projects, we take a certain percentage, up to 100%, and reinvest it into future projects. And that's something, actually in our next committee next week, we're gonna review the actual guidance and process for doing that. And then if you go to the next slide. And then from the carbon, we thought, well, we should at least do some investigation into methane and the other greenhouse gases. I mean, as we know, methane, depending on which metric you look at, it's either 25 or 80-some times more potent as a greenhouse gas. So there's possibly an opportunity there. And then the last thing we're proposing is, or suggesting is, we can come back and report on the progress that we're achieving. And you can see, hopefully we'll see the reduction over time. You know, obviously the electricity, once that goes to zero carbon, right there, that's a 43% reduction. So that's why we think 80% is certainly a good target. You know, without, you know, you need to have a target to reach a goal, right? You need to set a goal to reach a goal. So that's where we are with this, and just, you know, if you have any questions or comments, I don't know if that seems reasonable.
Laura, you're at the edge of your seat.
Yeah, well, of course, you know, I've been following the Energy Committee work closely, and I appreciate the vigor of the committee and what you've presented to us tonight. And I definitely support it, and I like that you are giving us a strategy for prioritizing building fuel first and then vehicles next, and let's see what we can do. And I'm glad to hear what you're saying about the efficiency of heat pumps as we go forward. I do wonder about what the committee's conversation has been around disruptions like power outages and extreme weather events on some of these choices. And if you could come back to us and speak to that, I think that would be very helpful.
No, that's a good comment.
We, if I may, we did have a conversation with the consulting engineer. I don't remember his name.
Daniel Dupras.
Daniel, yeah.
Daniel Dupras.
Dubras, yes, about the about Ilsley Library, and you know, the building has a very large heat mass, and if you turn off the heat when it's 15 below, the building will slowly cool down, and its contents will slowly cool down. At some point, it becomes cold enough that people aren't going to want to work there. Okay, but it's not dangerous until it gets to the point where the pipes freeze. How long do power outages last in comparison to how long it takes the building to cool off? You know, and that's I don't for sure know the answer, but the consulting engineer seemed comfortable that it would be unlikely that a power outage would last so long that the building itself and its contents would be in danger. You might have to shut a building down to public use for a few days, or a day or two, while you wait for it to warm up again. And I'm not an expert in this, Lord knows. This is just what I heard.
But maybe we can get some information on, you know, how long would it take to cool down to the point where it wouldn't be a...
Or what should the town be pursuing as backup energy?
Well, and in their proposal, they had two options. One had a backup system. You know, and so the question is, for that reason, do you go with that route? You know,
But it turns out that there are, it used, until very recently, it was not, it did not meet state standards to have electric resistive heating built into your electric heat pump system in a public building. And those standards apparently are now about to change. So it will be possible to build electric resistive heat into the system as a backup. The alternative that they priced for the backup system involved basically keeping the existing ductwork in the building and then using that ductwork to distribute heat, and it was very expensive. It was gonna double the price of the system, to put that kind of backup in, which seemed exorbitant.
But we'll have that discussion and see.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
I'm also glad to see that you targeted the wastewater treatment facility, which we do know is a big electric user because it's running 24/7 and it, we have to pump what we do. And I'm wondering where we are in our research of replacement for that facility.
There's a draft report that was just submitted in the last week or so that Dan will be bringing to the infrastructure committee.
Okay,
So-
good.
We have done some research in terms of pumps,
Mhm.
and there's much greater efficiency with the newer pumps. So, and that's one thing we were gonna take to our committee in terms of projects to fund, maybe pump replacements, potentially.
Mhm.
Can I add one more thing? The wastewater treatment plant is of interest to us for two reasons. One is because it uses a lot of electricity. The other is because a typical wastewater treatment plant releases a fair amount of methane in its operation. And some back-of-the-envelope calculations suggest that a treatment plant the size of the one that we operate releases enough methane that's the carbon dioxide equivalent of all the rest of the carbon dioxide that we produce from our energy use in the town. It's about the same order of magnitude, roughly the same. So we have to, as we explore this and try to understand this better, we can't ignore the other greenhouse gases.
I have a quick question. Is the Energy Committee committed to continuing to track the information and provide, I saw something in your slide, but I think it would be really important to continue to look at the data so we know how we're doing and we can, have like a report card of how close or far we are from the whatever goal we decide to set.
Yeah.
So is the committee willing to make that?
Absolutely. So we had two Middlebury College students who did a J-term project to help establish the Energy Portfolio Manager baseline. It's a free app that's provided that you can use to, first you lay down your baseline, and then you can track how you're doing in terms of carbon reduction.
Liv Herdman, who is another member of the committee, and I are really quite committed to continuing to monitor the usage. It's the more years of comparable data you have to look at, the more informative it is. And those two students did go back a year before the year that I used in this demonstration, and I have not yet absorbed that information from the students, but
Yeah, it's coming. It's our next meeting.
but we'll have at least a 2-year time trend. And a 3-year time trend is much better than a 2-year time trend, and a 5-year time trend is much, much better than a 2-year time trend.
Right.
So it is our intent to continue that.
Yeah, and that's why we're suggesting maybe coming back here periodically, whatever, however often, to at least show how we're doing as a municipality.
Can I just make one other?
Formalizing this is something that would be essential, wouldn't it?
Yeah, no, absolutely, yep,
So it's not just an ad hoc thing.
right, it's not, yeah, yes.
So I would just say that I'm supportive in general, but when I did read this and I saw the 8 years and the numbers, I kind of went, thinking, how are we going to do this? So I'm actually feel a little better now that I've heard your presentation. So I just wanted to say it seems a little more doable because I keep hearing about like the dump trucks and the backhoes and stuff, and just I'm not sure we're going to hit those marks in 8 years. Just in like I'm looking at like progress we've made in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
But knowing what you've presented about the buildings and that opportunity, and then maybe some of the lighter vehicles, I feel a little less about it. So I think maybe I think it's good to set, a high bar and see what we can do, so.
And it is aggressive, but like we said before, there are a lot of unknowns, right? So,
Nick?
Well, I mean, this is the first we've had a chance to see it, but as you probably already know, I'm a technical person, I'm an engineer.
Right.
So, as an engineer, I'm always saying, okay, what's the other side? What's the total story? And decarbonization of electricity, a lot of what we get is nuclear. So, are we supporting advancement of nuclear? And continued on that, because that's a big part of our energy package right now, especially since this past week in this state, we're not generating anything on solar.
but GMP is looking to phase out nuclear over time. I don't know what that time frame is. You know, is it a bridge between where we are now and where we need to get to? I mean,
Or is it in France where they're actually looking at it as, with the smaller distributed nuclear plants, as a reliable decarbonized?
I do believe GMP, in the talk I went to, was looking to reduce that over time in their portfolio.
So I guess, you know, it's a goal, and a lot of us we're already doing. You know, the more efficient pumps, that's, when Dan comes to us, he's already looking at that. These are things we're doing just as good practice, and in fact, one is good practice because we know we have an emergency we have to deal with, but then also it's just more efficient, and it's cost savings. Again, as you say, look at the total picture, sometimes one of the aspects in electric vehicles are advancing rapidly, they're coming, but the production of the lithium-ion battery is not innocent. You know, it's very high. So we just have to make sure that in the direction we're going, where we are looking at the total picture and not passing this from us to another source of carbon, that we really are genuinely solving it. So I appreciate what you've done. I appreciate the strategy and the approach. And it's laudable goal, but we have to make sure we're doing is technically accurate. Even in the case of heat pumps, I deal extensively in heritage buildings, and some of the problems that have encountered in heritage buildings include microclimate development, things like that cause health issues in the building because you're not getting adequate circulation through from these. It's not a matter of just shoving a thing on a wall like you can in a new building and it works. It's much more complex than that. So we have to make sure that we're not also solving one problem and creating others in the process. So that's why I would say we have to be very objective and evaluate the whole picture.
Yeah, and I think those are the discussions that need to be had in the advisory board, or whatever we're going to call that. I mean, and we did at one point look at the whole life cycle of various alternatives, because as you're saying, they're not as great as they appear to be on the surface. So I think we're in agreement there.
Good.
Yeah.
Thanks.
May I add something? I really appreciate you bringing this up. And I didn't know your technical background, but I'm glad to know it. I'm glad that somebody on the select board with that background.
The others aren't. Well, for Hot is,
A little bit.
yeah, a little bit.
You know, I don't know exactly how Green Mountain Power is going to reach their 100% renewable goal. Certainly, a lot of it's going to depend on hydro, a lot of it's going to depend on solar, a lot of it's going to depend on wind, some of it's going to depend on battery storage. And for a while at least, maybe some of it will still depend on nuclear until they can zero that out. Every one of those methods of generating energy has generated opposition from somebody. People have been opposed to offshore wind, people have been opposed to turning farmland into solar farms, people have been opposed to dispossessing First Nations people from their lands in Quebec in order to generate hydropower. Every method that we can think of to generate electricity has at least somebody who's opposed to some part of it, and often for good reason. And so there always will be choices to be made about which costs and which hazards are we willing to take in order to protect ourselves from a climate catastrophe. And that's going to be the question.
Actually, one of the interesting aspects, and I travel extensively, so it gives me a lot of time to read between point A's and B. And among the interesting things, and I know there's been some discussion around here, is to actually take the methane that we generate off of our wastewater treatment plant and use it as a bioenergy to basically create some of our own electricity, which is very intriguing, and as they've done in farms. You know, there's a role for bioenergy, so even the idea of, okay, we're just gonna completely get rid of methane, or we really, what we're after is, can we capture that methane and use it effectively, because it's there? And the answer is maybe.
And that's definitely something we'll take a look at. I mean, it's been discussed.
Okay, good, thanks.
Anything else from the board? So, I see a couple of things here, a couple of tasks. And first, when I was looking at it, I'm looking at some of the mandates to get to that. And I work in heavy equipment, and there's not a lot of heavy equipment that's being pushed towards electrifying it for a number of reasons, but they are being mandated to go to cleaner and cleaner burning, but to get to zero on those particular pieces, I think the 8-year target is probably very unrealistic. So, and I know that you 40% of fuel. I mean, I read the whole thing several times. My point being that I think more work needs to be done before we adopt a policy that is seen as unrealistic. And my first look at it is I say this is an unrealistic objective. But maybe it is realistic. I don't know. I think a lot more work needs to be done. I would like to see us send this work to our staff, our paid staff, and have them look at it in their departments and say, you know, what's reasonable, and come back with maybe some recommendations of reasonable for them. And then we'd have to roll it up and help work with the Energy Committee. I'm really happy we've got an Energy Committee that is very energized, and certainly Howard and Richard coming here, and the work that you put into it, I'm very impressed, and so don't get me wrong. I just want to go through a process that I think allows all stakeholders to look at it and provide their input as well, so it's not just one committee. And I want to do it in a way that it doesn't drag everybody down to working on it. So I think if we give that to Kathleen and ask her to have the staff look at it and come back to us with a reasonable, you know, if it's, I don't know, I think we'd ask Kathleen what's reasonable. Is 60 days reasonable, 90 days? You got a lot of stuff going on over the next little bit, you know, 120 days. You tell me what works if we decided, if the board agrees to do that.
Do you want to shoot for 90 days, and if we come back earlier?
Let's try for 90 days.
Well, would the other suggestion be, Brian, you know, we have the retreat where we discuss what staff is doing and our priorities for them.
And you know, that's a good point too. Maybe we should wait, this should be on our board during the retreat, and so that, because we have some other things that we're going to be tasking to work on, and you know, also coming out of the Energy Committee and energy work we've done is hoping to come up and do a lot of work on solar and town energy plan. So, you know, there's a pretty sizable amount of work coming out of the committee, great ideas and real world problems. And so, you know, how would prioritize them and which one goes first? And then part of that, the other thing that comes out of this is is a request for an amendment to our energy policy, and I think that definitely ought to have staff input on that, which is how the Energy Committee might work best with staff on purchasing decisions, and whether that's a mandate or whether that's a resource, or, you know, how that policy or process would play best. So those are my recommendations, if the board is in agreement.
Yeah, I think so. You know, we need to get this right. We don't just have policy, we need to get it right. And I'm just sitting here thinking right now of some of the other aspects of it is purchasing better grade equipment that lasts longer. You know, if a road grader lasts 20% longer, then that's an energy savings. You know, or any of the stuff, and that is a way where, as Brian talked about, heavy equipment, where there can be a benefit. So it's a bigger item, and it's gonna keep getting bigger. So I agree. I would, you know, if we decide that this is something, and I think, sounds like we all are in agreement, it's something that's important, but to have a discussion with Kathleen and town staff to figure out how it can be done well with their schedule.
Well, and you know, one of the things, just a simple, one of the bullets that in the brief was about replacing heating systems as they as their lifespan. I don't know. We don't have a master lifespan of our heating systems, and what's the anticipated replacement dates. And so that all comes into, is 2028 the magic time? You know, did we just put in a heating system that's anticipated to last us 15 years? And then we have to make judgment calls on prioritization of funds and the payback, and so it's a very worthwhile discussion, but I think we need to do some more background data and kind of finish filling in all the pieces.
Might just have to
Brian?
have Richard make it to 85. What do you think?
I don't think there's anyone who's without commitment. And you say, it's like saying, do you have a commitment to leave a burning house? I mean, obviously, we realize that there is a crisis going on, and that it's a worldwide crisis, but it obviously involves working locally to address it. Fires burning here as well as in Virgins and so on and so forth. I guess I think you can say that there is a select board commitment, but I think that there is also a realization. I mean, how are we going to do this? And you've cited strategies go electric and then decarbonize the electricity. I mean, that sounds like a very good and plausible way to go, and that needs to be explored. That has to be implemented, of course, by Green Mountain Power. It has to be implemented by all sorts of people who are doing this. I'm a bit concerned that we simply say a goal. Well, I'll be 96 in 2028, and I hope I'm around. Well, I'm not sure I do. But in any case, it's a matter of saying that we really have to get on with this and hauling pails of water. I mean, whatever it may be, and I think that to send something like this to the staff and just say, well, this is a committee that's worked very hard, and they've come up with some very good suggestions for what the town can do, and how do you think this can work out? I think that's the best course to follow, and we have, I think, a very good staff. So I think you would get results as far as that.
One second, let me just beg a question. Is this something that would be appropriate to integrate into that energy plan goal that we're talking about? In which case, it's really one larger project.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I don't know.
I-
I don't know. Kathleen, thoughts on that? You know, the talk that we've had about the,
Yes, I think it would be good to check in with Jen and get her thoughts on it. Jen Murray, our town
Mhm.
planner.
She did come to one of
Yes.
our meetings,
Yeah.
and we,
Yeah,
she's
I-
on the board.
I
think
think if we
that's
could
very
just add to,
important.
a comment to that. An approach to reducing carbon use, carbon production by the town as a whole in people's homes and their businesses and their vehicles is really important. It's an enormous project. It's clearly within the scope for the planning commission as well as for the energy committee. The operations of the town is a narrower problem. The one that we came to you to talk to tonight is just about the operations of the town. And I would hate to lose track of an achievable goal in the town's operations in the midst of trying to do a town-wide energy plan. I
okay,
personally
yeah.
would
Well, that's
be
a good point,
uncomfortable with
Richard.
that.
That's a good point, Richard. And so really, you're talking two different projects. So, okay. Back to my first thought then. Yes.
So I'm just wondering if there's a way that this could be presented to department heads by the two of you, maybe rather than just, emailing a
We would-
document.
Of course we would go.
I just fear that, like there would be some important dialogue lost,
Yeah.
and I think that it would just be worthy to have it more face-to-face.
I'd be happy to do that.
So my one comment on that is I would leave it up to Kathleen, but I would say that they have offered to be available for a staff meeting if you had one.
So I do value what Brian is suggesting, although I do also disagree with a little bit in that I don't think it hurts us to set some high-level bar and shoot for it, because that's what you do when you set goals. You set a bar and you shoot for it, and we don't know. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know what it's gonna be, but I don't think there's much harm. I do value what staff would have for input on it. Obviously, I would value that very highly, but at the same time, do see a need to set some kind of goal and shoot for it. And don't think there's a lot of harm in saying, saying, we're trying to achieve something. And we may not reach it, but we can try, and maybe we will get that much better just for trying.
Just, I'm not saying don't set a goal that's a stretch. I'm saying don't set an unreasonable goal.
Kind of what I think I hear you saying, set performance objectives.
And then there just may always be some level of disagreement on what a reasonable goal is,
Right.
so.
Yeah.
But that
Yeah, but-
would be a common, so.
Yeah, but more fact-finding will tell us what's an easy get, what's a stretch, and what's a real stretch, and what's
Other-
unreasonable.
Other than knowing a little more information about what our anticipated heating system replacement schedule is, I don't think what they presented is, I think there's some good fact there, so, anyway.
And maybe something we could look into is with replacement schedule and life of of existing heating systems, maybe try to align that with a strategy, so to maybe have a potentially more realistic, or maybe it'll validate what we're trying to do here.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At my house, we have engaged a contractor to put in cold climate heat pumps in my house. And we first thought that we have an existing natural gas furnace with a fan that blows hot air and cold air through the house. And we thought, well, we'll just replace the furnace with a great big heat pump, and we won't have to replace the ductwork, we won't have to replace the fan, everything will be very simple. But then we started thinking about backup for power outages and for very cold days, and we thought, well, you know, we don't have to throw away our existing natural gas furnace. We can keep the furnace and the ductwork and the fan and put the heat pumps in as wall-mounted units, and we might only run that central furnace 3 or 4 days a year on the coldest days. And I know other people have made similar choices. So when you're looking at some of the existing heating infrastructure, perhaps reaching its use-by date at some point, reaching the date, maybe it doesn't need to be thrown away. Maybe it can be extended for 10 or 20 years as a backup system for an electric heat pump that is a separate system that is a separate system. So there are some other options there.
I actually did something similar, but I have gas-fired hot water heat. I put in heat pumps which work fine in the shoulder season. They actually do nice cooling on the warm days, but the geometry of the house is such they don't work very well when you get to the cold time like this, so I shut them off in the winter and go to hot water heat because it's just a much more efficient system in the way it distributes the heat throughout. So it actually does a better job of avoiding those cold spots in the house than the heat pump could do. But nonetheless, it is, again, it's not a simple thing. There's a lot of options, but we appreciate the fact that what you're bringing forward, and you know, we do the technically right thing.
That's a good point.
So thank you very much for all the work you guys are doing.
Yeah.
Thanks
and-
for listening, thank you.
And we've got a target for 90 days to get some input back from staff.
Sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you much.
Thank you.
Great stuff.
So next is the agreement to the town of New Haven for the maintenance of Cobble Road. Kathleen?
Yes. So in your packet is the proposed agreement between the towns of Middlebury and New Haven for the maintenance of Cobble Road, which runs from Munger Street eastwardly to the New Haven-Bristol town line, which is roughly 800 feet west of Route 116. This is a successor agreement to an initial agreement dated April 2nd, 2013. Our DPW Operations Director provided some additional background on the agreement. Over the course of the 5-year term of the Cobble Road Agreement between the towns of Middlebury and New Haven for seasonal road maintenance, there arose several issues and concerns that dictated a renegotiation of the language and schedules contained in the document. To that end, members of both town public works departments met and discussed current and ongoing issues of concern with maintenance and capital improvement needs of the road. Also, during the summer of 2019, both towns performed stormwater maintenance upgrades to the road, Middlebury on the south side of the road and New Haven on the north side of the road, in order to bring the road to the current municipal roads general permit standards. With those things complete, the proposed changes in the language were approved by both public works departments. The main change to the agreement was to go from a seasonal maintenance responsibilities to annual maintenance responsibilities for a more equitable distribution of the cost to both towns.
I just have a quick comment, and I just noticed, and it just may be the terming of the contract, but that Middlebury would have 3 years of annual maintenance where New Haven would have 2, and just not knowing the history, maybe, so right now it's been split, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So one has the summer and one has the winter versus having it for the whole year, having the summer and the winter, right? So wondering if it made sense just to keep it fair to make it a 6-year contract, so there's 3 years for each town? And
Okay.
would that be reasonable or not, or do you think that I'm not,
Might as well.
okay?
That's That sounds right.
Yes, please, come forward here.
I think by equitable.
Could you state your name?
Oh, I'm sorry. My name is Brockton Corbett. I think by equitable it means each town would pay like a similar proportion of their budget to the road. I'm not sure of New Haven's how much their town budget is, but having maintenance for 3 years at a higher budget versus 2 years at a lower budget makes it more equitable rather than equal. There's a little difference there.
I think you meant equal, though. It's a shared road.
So, I'm not sure.
So I think the intent was to alternate years. So, and that was considered equitable by both departments, so extending it to the 6-year term, so everybody gets equal shares seems reasonable.
I mean, it's, so nobody knows what the winter's gonna be, so it could be a year that
Got
Middlebury
lucky.
has winter maintenance, it's, we get 10 snowstorms, and the year that New Haven has, they get none, but we can't predict that, so we can only just say,
Well, you'd have
this
to
year-
average it over the 3 years that we have it.
Yeah.
yeah.
Evens
I-
out.
But I still think this is an okay way to do it, as long as we're just as long as we're fair in the sharing, I guess. I do understand what you're saying, equitable versus equal, but we're agreeing to cover all of the expenses for the road on an annual basis and rotate years. So I just think maybe a 6-year, so there's 3 years for each.
So we call it equal responsibility of a shared road.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Sure.
So do,
Any other questions of the board? So then, the motion, if it's the desire of the board, would be with the amendment,
So, I'll move to authorize Town Manager Kathleen Ramsey to sign the agreement between the towns of Middlebury and New Haven with the proposed amendment, to extend the contract for 6 years and have 3 years assigned to each town, regarding the maintenance of Cobble Road.
moved and seconded. Any other comments? Hear none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Kathleen, preparations for town meeting. Or Heather?
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, this is the seating. Yeah, you got
Yeah,
a drawing for us?
Yeah, so, I'm sorry you didn't have this in your packet. That was, my, failure to remember that it was in my bag for the last 3 days. I did send it to Kathleen, I don't know how well you, and this is like really rough, so, I'll give you a little bit of background and then we can talk about it. So, I was trying to find the information, I think it was from the last meeting where Susan had suggested maybe we sit down below, and I know there was some cons to that idea, but I kind of like, so one of the things that I really liked about when we tried the elementary school was that we were sitting at the same level as the members of the town, that we were not set up on the stage. I personally can't stand being up, above everyone, but that's just my own personal. Anyway, so one comment is, so questions, so originally I was thinking I would meet with Kathleen and just know what was possible there and not, but given the agenda, this is kind of what I'm thinking. And it may not be feasible, so we can, anyway. One, I wondered if the screen was movable. I think it's fixed. Is it fixed? So, it comes down from the sky. I like that. Is it possible, does anyone have a screen that's movable? That would just make things a little more, something that I was thinking about. If it doesn't move and it stays where it is, my first option here would be to, rather than set us in front of the screen, to break the table in two, make it at kind of a diagonal, and make half of us on one side kind of at a diagonal, so that we could also see the screen. There may be loss of sight to the audience, to all of us, but I don't think they need to see us when we're just sitting there listening to the presentation. And another downside to this is people sitting on the far side would have to cross all the way over to the other side to the podium. I don't know if there's cords there, if they're trip hazards, or I don't, anyway. So that option, like a split table kind of at an angle, was one thought. If the screen was movable, I thought, on the second option of offsetting the screen, moving it a little closer, then making a single table kind of at an angle between the podium and the screen. But if the screen isn't movable, then that's not an option, so. Anyway, and the other one went back to the idea of us sitting in the first row. When I attended the meeting for the school board on the facilities master planning, most of the board sat in the audience for that presentation, and people that needed to speak got up and went up on stage for the presentation. I thought to avoid that, we could set the podium down between the side and the middle aisle, have the podium right on the floor level, and the select board seated on the side in the first couple of rows. We could get up to the podium, we'd be at the same level, but I couldn't find the information of what the cons were for the lower level idea. So there's kind of where my brain's been going, and maybe it doesn't work or you don't like the ideas, which is totally fine, but I'm on the agenda, so I'm taking my 5 minutes.
Remind me how we set up last year.
We were right in front,
We
like,
were in front of
like
the
in a
screen
straight
in a
row.
row
Was the screen above us?
behind us.
behind us.
Because we had to get out of the way.
So we can't see the screen.
Yeah,
Unless-
but it-
unless
it
we
was-
turn-
It was above our head behind
Yeah.
us.
So you
Yeah.
you followed on your laptop, kind of.
So, first question, if you need a movable screen, how big? It has to be a big one, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
If it's a movable screen, how big
I don't know.
is,
And I also think that the projector is set in the ceiling to go on the
Oh.
screen, so that's,
okay. no.
So then
set
you
as
would need
well.
another projector.
and it's
Yeah, so-
all wired, so my laptop feeds into the wiring system.
In the
Yes, we could do
projector.
that with a different, portable projector, but that's just
But-
another piece.
But that just adds another setup. So see, these are some of the things that I don't know, so I can't
Well-
take them into consideration in my
Now you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, I think your number 3 is.
I
I'm
know,
not-
I like number 3.
What's fine.
was leaning toward number 3.
Even if we could find a screen, I would still prefer number
Yeah.
3, I think. It's just a question of where to position the podium.
Can you wave your hands?
Stand up.
Uh-huh.
We're saving electricity? Yeah, how much carbon did we just save in that few minutes?
I mean, it is a town meeting, and I don't see that the select board has to be on display, and we have our moments when we have to go up to the podium and say something.
Right.
We get it over with and we sit down. So I think number 3 is the easiest solution, and
Yeah, thank you for configuring that. So as far as the podium is concerned, I didn't get to the supervisory union meeting. How did it feel with it being on the stage? Do you think there's,
floor, right?
well,
I don't
in their case, was it on the
I remember
stage?
that they actually had a podium.
Oh,
They
okay.
may have just had speakers up on the stage speaking without a podium when they were presenting.
Okay.
I don't know that they had a podium, but I think for town meeting with a moderator, we probably want to have a podium.
Where would the moderator be?
I would say,
At the podium?
yeah.
At the podium, yeah.
So we usually have, okay.
So the
And
other
can they
alternative is,
see that podium from, you've been in there more recently, and my kids have been out of school long enough that I
Yeah, that's what
forget.
I can't tell without
if
getting
you
it.
set
If
it,
it's on the
if you
floor?
set it in the middle of, in the
Of a-
middle
of an
here, you would be able to see it. I don't know that there's room, like to set it in the middle, like in the first, like, I don't know that
Can
there's
these
room.
people- Well, it all depends upon how many people we have, but can these people over here see the,
It would be worth it would be a
So
worth maybe.
perhaps, we generally have two podiums.
Do we?
One for the moderator and one for.
Oh, one on the table.
Yeah.
I'd
So
forgotten
perhaps the moderator could be on stage with the town clerk and the minute taker, so she would have a good view of the audience and have
I
the
forgot
select board
about the,
podium. on
I
the floor.
forgot about the town clerk and the minute taker too. So see,
You forget, we know that.
yeah. Oh, I forget all the time.
that would be a good idea though, because if there's questions, she can actually view out over the audience a little better than if you're down in it. But we don't need to necessarily, because we're not controlling the meeting.
Right, so then it's just a question of how do we participate? And so are we taking a handheld mic and just going up to the stage if we're
So
presenting?
we'd have a podium.
We would have a,
On the floor.
Yeah.
On the floor or on the stage?
On the floor is not.
In the middle.
You know,
Or the other option is to travel up onto the stage, to a podium on the stage when it is our turn to speak, or have a second, you know.
I like the floor, just because I think it does, if we're using essentially what citizens will be using, the same sort of, setup, where we're on the floor with them and we have a mic, I think it sends that message that, the email person who was asking about this was going for, which is, that we're a part of the community and we all have an equal voice.
so,
Is there an option to put, and I'm not super for this idea, but is there an option to put a second screen on the raised portion with the camera pointing at the main podium so that people who are toward the back of the other end could see better? Or is that too complicated?
Probably a second screen, so people who can't see the main thing can see on the.
Because the main screen will have the
presentation.
The presentation, but for the people in the back, if there were just a simple second.
I don't know that
I think
there's,
they can see the moderator.
I don't know
think
that,
they'll be able to see?
yeah, I
Oh,
don't
no,
know.
I'm saying to see us, to see the podium, to see
Like
the
in the
speaker.
front?
Right, because you were saying people toward the back may not be able, if the podium is here,
So
may not be able
that
to
would have
see.
been my comment. I was going to go for option number one because I think people need to see who they are being represented by, I think. That was the only thing.
You're saying option number one with the board
We being on,
Up
yeah,
top,
so
or-
we should be, I think we should be seen by people. They know who we are, and if they have a direct question, they can ask us. I don't know.
what do you think?
Well, I've been, this is what, my 11th meeting. I remember we had the floor at the old town gym. We've had Mary Hogan, we've had the high school, and they've all worked. So this is something I honestly don't have an opinion one way or another. I'm whatever, I'll make it work as far as I'm concerned. So I just don't have a,
To me, the main problem last year I had was with the seating, that we sat in a straight line, and we completely, Victor, Lindsay, and myself were in that corner. We couldn't even see you speaking on the podium because we were like straight. So I would have had a horseshoe if I had my.
I don't think, so we had some comments about people not being able to see the screen behind us,
Because
right?
of us, the screen was high enough.
Not
Was it?
last year. I think last year we were okay with visibility of the screen. We want to keep the font size as big as we can so people can see what's projected on the screen. But I think the issue was that we couldn't see
We
it.
couldn't see the screen.
We can't see
And
it.
we couldn't see Brian, right, depending
Yep.
on your angle, so but we could hear you, so. So,
Well, this is just
yeah.
very rough picture. I mean, just, some ideas, so.
I mean, if it could fit, but number one, it is kind of nice for people to see their select board, their elected officials.
I
So
do,
on the one hand, I do think about that. On the other hand, I like the equity of kind of like being in the audience. so I could go either.
I mean, another option that's not quite on here, but most of it is here, is the podium goes on the stage and we sit down below. And so whoever's going up can be seen.
Right.
I'm not super excited about the possibility of tripping on the stairs on the way up, but.
Oh, you get used to it after a while. Yeah. I
Yeah.
think the first year I knocked the microphone over and it sounded like a bomb went off in the place.
The downside to one is is probably some loss of sight to the select board,
Right,
for the audience in this configuration, like people over here may not be able to see the people here.
On the right side,
You know, the same deal, so,
I agree.
you know, if the objective is to be seen, I don't know that one,
You're gonna accomplish that, so now how do you feel?
Sure, I mean, it seems to me, again, it's the town meeting, it's not a select board meeting, and therefore, it seems to me that the select board members are members of the town, and I would much prefer, that's why I rather go for number 3. I mean, as far as the podium, if you want it up on the stage, yes, and then, so we'd have to go up a few stairs when our turn comes to say something, and we could do that, and then we're seen.
Across in front
So
of her.
I think that accomplishes all the purposes, and,
And they can easily see you when you're speaking.
Can
Would-
we get in there to do a dry run with the screen down? Could we get in the space and set it up and see how visible things are?
But, let me just throw an option out. So I'm hearing that, the thought that, you know, sitting with the townspeople gives a feeling that we're part of the town. And this is the town meeting, not the select board meeting. So if we're sitting in the front row, ease to get back up on stage. Stage, I forget, stage left, was it that when you're
Stage right
standing on
is when
stage?
you're standing
Stage
on
right,
stage.
stage right would be Susan and Ann and the note taker, and with a podium. And then stage left would be a podium for Kathleen and the select board to do presentations off from. They would be easily seen when they're speaking, and otherwise not a hindrance and a distraction to the meeting. Just a thought.
so two podiums on either side,
right.
Yep.
where we wouldn't take over for where Susan is presenting, and we would walk up to what would be our podium, or, you know.
Yep,
Yeah.
that would work.
Yeah.
Okay.
Done.
Would pe-
Next.
Well, just enough. Would people like, I don't know whether this is useful or not, to have a name tag so that people can identify us? If your goal is to have people really recognize us as their elected representatives?
Well, it'll be,
Hello, my name is.
will be
I don't know.
introduced early in this,
Yeah, they
in the meeting. And then,
Okay.
it wouldn't be bad to have name tags.
So maybe when we're introduced, we all come up on stage, or we all come up and then we're all introduced before we then go sit
Or
down,
we could introduce ourselves,
or, yeah?
Yeah. Either.
something like that.
So that way we are all seen and all introduced.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think Jim always just introduced the select board and the town manager and anyone else who, town clerk and so on, so that everyone would know who they are.
But maybe what we do when Susan does that this year is we all come up on stage for that.
Right, because, we'll
Part
be
of it.
down with our
Well,
backs to the audience, so they won't see
Well, we could stand
us.
up and turn around, whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, I would.
We're
I
getting
wouldn't-
very
I wouldn't try to
technical, right?
orchestrate this, so.
I think next we need to talk about attire and costumes and what we should be wearing.
We've already been given those memos, haven't
And
we?
just remember the colors, nothing too busy.
To wear a tie, of course.
Okay, thank you, Heather.
Yes, thank you. So Kathleen, certificate for bond votes, resolution.
So as part of the board's due diligence for the bond votes that are going to be taking place at town meeting, election, the board needs to adopt the resolution that's in your packet and authorize the town clerk to sign it.
I move to authorize Town Clerk Ann Webster to sign the resolution certificate for Articles 8 through 10 to be presented to the voters at town meeting on March 3rd, 2020.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Kathleen, along this, because that's not the real, because we're seeking approval to bond for the full amount so that we can qualify for grants and et cetera. I know there was an article a while back. Would it be good to somehow get John to educate guys, to, educate the community on why we're doing that, and so that they don't look at that and say, oh boy.
Okay.
I'd hate to see that voted down.
I did ask Dan to try to have the engineers come into the select board's next meeting, just to
Okay.
do a high-level overview of the project and funding. I'll see what the status of that is and also reach out to John.
So that could get into the minutes at least.
And John is following us online, so
Oh, he doesn't have to come here anymore. Is he across the street at the pub or what? Hi, John.
So, my understanding, like with the flood resiliency project, is we would bond for the entire amount, and then FEMA would, would cover their portion, but we would still have to bond for that, for that particular project.
And then they pay us back 75%.
Right. So there,
But on the
but
water
you're-
one, we need to approve the full amount to,
but we may not actually bond for the full amount.
that's the idea.
Right.
Well,
We
don't-
hopefully
definitely
don't want to.
We definitely don't intend to bond for the
Right.
full amount.
So we do have some responsibility, I think, at town meeting to make sure that's clear to voters,
Yeah.
the difference and the different projects, so.
My concern is that that's on the Australian ballot, and our number of people that come to town meeting will
Yeah.
not carry that vote. We
Right.
need other people to vote in favor of it.
Yep. And why you're hoping to have a good article in the paper.
Exactly.
Okay,
Maybe I'll write it, maybe I'll write an op-ed.
there you go.
It's
That would be
yours.
great.
Victor?
Okay, so, let me see what I have to say here. Okay, so I move to approve total expenditures in the amount of $109,860.45. Oh, no, I'm sorry. In the amount of $225,000, $225,113.69, consisting of accounts payable, $115,253.24, and payroll, $109,860.45, for the period January 29th to 2020 through February 11th, 2020.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Kathleen, Town Manager's Report.
Okay. So there is a first draft of the agenda for the board's retreat on March 17th in your packet for your review. We'll schedule a time at your next meeting to discuss planning for the retreat further. So
That's the first meeting after.
that is, you have your organizational meeting on the 10th, and then this would be a special meeting on the third Tuesday of the month.
I better put that on my calendar. Thank you.
Good news, in January, FEMA completed a technical feasibility and cost-effectiveness analysis of the East Middlebury Flood Resiliency Project. Project dimensions examined in the analysis included maintainability, resistance to natural hazards, and cost-effectiveness, and FEMA's analysis has concluded that the project is both technically feasible and cost-effective. had a telephone conference with representatives from FEMA and the Vermont A&R yesterday, which was very encouraging about getting the permits in place in the near future, hopefully by July 1, when
Wow.
work can take place in the river.
It's all falling into place at the last minute, huh?
One step at a time. VLCT is offering its Spring Selectboard Institute at the Capitol Plaza in Montpelier on Saturday, March 21st, from 8:30 to 3 p.m. Registration deadline is March 14th, so right after the election, for any new members that might be interested. So please let me know if you're interested by Monday, March 9th. VLCT will also be holding a workshop at the Middlebury town offices on Wednesday, April 1st, from 12:30 to 3:30 p.m., called Transparency Essentials, an overview of sunshine laws intended to support public access to local government. If you are interested in attending, please let me know. Okay.
Would you sign me up, please?
And I'll extend that invitation to all of our boards and commissions.
So we can do the first one also?
Mm-hmm.
Can I sign up for both?
Yeah, sure. And that's it.
Okay, thank you, Kathleen. Board member concerns, Nick?
First of all, I'm just glad to know that I didn't say anything negative about John Flowers. I didn't realize he was watching us. So,
And Nick,
lucked out on that one.
bring the mic close.
Oh. This way I didn't want John to hear that. You know, I was sitting here thinking about the last time our last meeting when we had the emergency medical people in front of us, and I've had several people come up to me and discuss this. And this is not ever meant to be construed as anything negative against them. They're a tremendous professional organization, and they provide a necessary service. But the concern that's come about is, well, one is, again, this sort of came to us pretty late in the game, in the budget game, and I would have much rather have had time to hear this earlier and have a discussion, as I'm sure we all would. But if this goes through, this will be the largest group that we provide funding to that's not under the control of our town manager. And, you know, if we think, I mean, we always hope and we trust there's good management, but we don't know that. If a taxpayer comes up to me and says, is this money being well spent? Are we spent and well managed? I can't give them an honest answer on that. Whereas if they ask, is Public Works or a library being well spent, I can say it is being well spent. So I don't know we can do at this point other than to possibly express these concerns in some sort of format, a letter or whatever at town meeting that says we support emergency medical, but we would like really more time to determine if this is money well spent and if the organization is actually on a good track to be successful. I mean, there are some things I heard, and this is that from what I do, maybe a little concerned about resource allocation, but I don't know the answers to that. So anyway, that's just, I've had a few people make the comments to me, and then I'm thinking about this myself, so this is the thought I had out there, and try to address this one, and because we know once it happened, if it does happen, for all practical purposes, it becomes a permanent thing. They don't go away too easy.
So, just so you know, Nick, Kathleen and I spoke today, and Kathleen has reached out to them to see if they have time to meet with Kathleen, myself, and Heather. If board members have questions or something, you know, if you could shoot those to Kathleen, as you think of those different things about that particular situation, I think we need to sit down with them and just kind of go through what steps, you know, and the funding. There was a number of the funds that are being voted on this year that you know, that's one of them, and, you know, frankly, I was approached by another nonprofit who felt that a nonprofit that was not directly in the community for, I mean, speaking of the food shelf, that there's duplication of services and that our money's getting split. And so, I don't know, maybe for future years, it would be the way we review that process we could talk about. But in this particular case, that was a late one, and I think maybe some additional diligence is in order so that at town meeting, we can speak to that a little bit better. So there's some questions that have come up since because it was such a short notice. So if you have those questions, if you could send them to Kathleen, we're going to try to meet with them and do some more due diligence before the.
Do you have an idea when that date is?
Well,
We're hoping for mid next week.
Okay.
So if you could get us questions by Friday, that way we can get those together, give them to EMS, and tell them these are the things that we'd like to discuss during that meeting.
Dan?
I just have one question. I think this is either a question or a statement, I'm not sure. But I'm in full support of what they need and what they do for our community. But they presented their whole project to you, or the increases, as a cost per person in the community. Instead of $250, it's going to go to $10. And I understand that, and that's one way to do it. But the cost is as a burden of the taxpayers. And with my business and everything, I'm going to pay for several people in the community, which I'm more than willing to do. But looking at it as a cost per person, is that correct way, or is it more appropriate to look at it as the cost per the taxpayer? And every taxpayer is going to have to look at that themselves and figure that out.
Yeah, and in fact, actually, when they presented, I mean, at first it was a percentage jump that was quite high.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, that was unsettling. Then they said $10 per person, and at first you think, okay, well, is that unreasonable? I don't necessarily think so, but then then you have situations like yours where you're having to pay for many. But to me, still the fundamental aspect of this is I personally can't say with great honesty that this money that is the taxpayers' money is being well spent and managed. Whereas I know the stuff that under Kathleen's control, it is. And so that's the fundamental crux of what's making me uneasy about this thing. And as I've thought about it more, maybe say, well, and hearing from various people around, it's time to say something about this. Because this, so, you know, if it is approved, it'll be an ongoing, continuous thing, and want to make sure it's wise.
Heather? I mean, Laura?
Okay, so I know we had a really messy storm this weekend, and I really appreciate the hard work of those that cleared our roads and sidewalks, including others that pitched in, and that I understand they work double shifts, especially on Sunday. And even with all of that, you know, I know that people still saw ice and slush on the sidewalks, but it was really the conditions of the storm, and I know that every best effort was made to really try to get everything open. And it was remarkable, actually, given the conditions, that we got as much as we got. So I just really want to emphasize that, again, we have an awful lot of sidewalks and roads to clear, and it takes time with a heavy storm like that to get all of that open. So we can help. We can help by being patient and not compounding it by packing down things. We can help by clearing driveways and opening passages as we see them. We can help by putting down sand and salt from the buckets that we see at crosswalks. And we can help our neighbors. And I saw a lot of people helping each other in this storm, and I hope we continue to see that good behavior.
Thank you, Laura. And I was actually approached by a number of people when I was doing the shopping and stuff over the weekend, how impressed. So if you could pass on from certainly not just the board, but I think their hard work was recognized throughout the town. Victor?
I think just to follow up on Nick's concern, I think maybe one item we should maybe have on our retreat is to discuss nonprofits and the funding of them, and because I share Nick's concern that taxpayers' money goes to organizations that we really have no administrative control over, and that I mean, I think that's an issue for general discussion and among us. I mean, the other thing I think it might be useful. We have had an education committee that met periodically with the school board, and I think it met quarterly or a few times a year. And it was very useful. I served on it in the past, and I wonder if we should revive that committee. And because there are issues, but some of the things we discussed is just when the school was just getting children to walk to school and providing safety. But there are various concerns, and I think it's useful maybe to have that committee revived.
Yeah.
So when we had that committee, it was before the consolidation. And then once the consolidation was approved, we no longer had like a Middlebury school board. You know, we have a consolidated school board, and the consolidated school board wasn't meeting with the select boards of all the individual towns. And so it felt a little odd to meet specifically with the Middlebury Select Board when it wasn't doing the same thing. So I think it would be, if we want to pursue that, would be important to reach out to maybe like Peter Burrows and just maybe get his feedback on.
Well, we used to meet, in fact, at Peter's office, and I think maybe he was sort of the convener, and it may very well be to leave it up to him what would be useful.
Yeah.
Sure.
Anyway, I just served on that with you.
Yes, I remember. Well.
So,
yes,
anyway.
That's right. I remember. That's right.
I think it changed.
The last meeting we had, actually. Yes.
And I think it's just changed with the consolidation. Not that I.
No.
I agree. There's some useful.
There is a difference, but I think it would be worth then approaching Peter and figuring out how, because we have no contact, and I think
I'm assuming that
useful.
They're not doing anything in a way of presentation at town meeting related to their budget, right?
I can reach out to them if you'd like.
Okay. I just want to quickly say, due to the weather on Friday, we made a decision to postpone the Creek Road Task Force meeting that was scheduled for 8 o'clock last Friday morning. And we are meeting, weather permitting, this Friday morning at 8 o'clock, the 14th. So just an update if any of you were going to try to be there.
Predicting another storm.
Are they really?
It's supposed to be a good ski day, so.
Well, we're trying.
No, you're doing your best.
Linz?
Nature has its way.
I was going to share that I attended a meeting last night put on by the folks at the Teen Center who are working on the Quality Youth Development Project, and it was led by 2 of our area youth. So they stood up in front of a room full of adults and gave their presentation, and it went really well. And they have achieved 2 of the 7 benchmarks already. We as a community have achieved 2 of the 7 benchmarks toward this certification. And, yeah, I just wanted to say that.
Awesome.
I just want to agree with Laura about the snowstorm and all the things that came with it. It was a massive storm, but all I heard was compliments to the town departments about how they handled it. It was a big storm and they did a good job.
Okay, we have a number of things for legal matters in executive session, and Heather's going to take us into it.
In accordance with Vermont's open meeting law requirements, I move that the board find that premature general knowledge of the consideration of legal matters would clearly place the select board at a substantial disadvantage because the select board risks disclosing its litigation strategy if it discusses the legal matters in public.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
I further move that the board enter into executive session to discuss legal matters under the provisions of Title I, Section 313A1 of the Vermont statutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Okay. Enter an executive session at 9:56.